After I left, we had to go and negotiate with EP Rugby at the time, which is, they didn't release me. So I had to stay for that 5 months. I had to stay for those figures, which is 1,200 Rand. Then I missed out on earning a bit of cash. And then Kevin Pat came to me and said, listen, Stick, okay, fine, I understand the situation, but make sure next year from January, when Xola drives to Cape Town, when Xola drives to Durban, I must make sure that I drive with him. So that was it, you know, and then the rest was history. So went with Xola to Durban, and then I signed my first contract with the Sharks. If you want to talk about amateur and professional, that's where my first professionalism, if you want to put it that way, that I've learned from the Sharks, you know. When I got there, everything was on the table where, listen, Stick, we are just interested in rugby. You know, we just want you to play your best rugby. So if you've got anything, any problem that you've got, you bring it to me, to us, and then we'll sort it out for me. They will sort it out for me. And Kevin Pat was an open coach to me, was a very, very open coach. He made me feel comfortable when I went there because of, once again, I was nervous. After losing my mom, she passed away 2001, you know. She passed away 2001. And 4 years later, 3 years later, and then getting a contract with the Sharks. And then I thought, you know what, maybe, like I said to you, there's always, there's always two ways, you know. I could have gave up in life about when I lost my mom because she was my everything, you know. But I thought, man, listen, after seeing that light in a rugby environment, seeing that maybe there's a future for me, you know what, I realized, you know what, maybe this is something that I can pay back to my mom, to say thank you for every sacrifice that she made for me, you know. And I remember when I went to the Sharks, I was weighing 77 kgs, you know, and our strength and conditioning coach back then, it used the guy by the name Mark Steele. He looks at me and says, Stick, listen, is there anything that I can help you with regarding your body, regarding your physique? And at that time, I'll be honest with you, if you talk endurance-wise, I was super fit. There are things that I used to do that people didn't know about it. I used to wake up 5 o'clock in the morning in the dark streets of New Brighton. You're just this young kid. You've got a goal, you know. Just hit the streets. Even if it's dark, you make sure that you stay in shape, you stay fit. Physically wise, I wasn't really up there. You know, like I said to you, I was weighing 77 kgs. So, and the guy looked at me and he knew, listen, this guy will struggle physique-wise, you know. So, and then he says to me, listen, Stick, I think you're gonna need to put some couple of kgs. My life changed like this, you know, my physique changed like this. My confidence, my strength, everything just changed like this. So that is a sort of professionalism that I was given by the Sharks, you know. And I have to be honest, in the space of 4 months, I've gained about 5 kgs from 77, and then I went to 82. And then I had confidence, I was still quick, I was still fit, you know. So that is a sort of professionalism that I got from the Sharks, you know. There's an old man, he still works for SA Rugby, by the name Mahlubi Puzi. So apparently he was the manager of the 7 system back in those days, you know. So he came to watch that tournament, and then he saw this skinny boy who was, because I used to do everything. So I got invited in one of the camps. Once again, you get to 7s, and it's a totally different game now. They talk about 7 players on the field. But because of I was fit, running wise, so I could get away with a lot of things, you know, and I had the skill. I was like a young, exciting boy, you know, from the township who was excited just to be given that opportunity, you know. So I went to play prelim club champs in Kenya, and then we lost in the final. I remember against Kenya, which is a very, very tough team to beat at home. So we lost that game, and then since then, the rest was history. I remember Paul True was promoted as a head coach when Chester left to go to, I think it was Super 10 or Super 12. When Chester went to Super 12, and then Paul True was promoted as a head coach. So that's when I got a first invite. I might have not played Springboks, but one thing from where I come from, that's something that I'm proud of. I've managed to play for Blitzbok and played 7s at the highest level, you know, and also playing for the team like Sharks that you normally see them on TV. You know, those are things that I look back and I don't take them for granted, you know. And it shows life is all about opportunities. If I wasn't given that opportunity by the Sharks or by Mr. Puzi back in those days, I wasn't probably gonna be at that level, but because of someone saw something in me that I maybe didn't believe. And once again, I made sure that, okay, fine. I grabbed that opportunity with both hands, and I look back now, it's a great story to tell. Those are great memories for me. The sevens is still part of my heart, still deep in my heart. If I look now where I am currently, I think if it wasn't for the tough times that I went through with the sevens team, because of there's no place to hide. To get what you want in life, you have to work hard for it. You have to earn it. And you're talking about 7 players on the field where there's no place to hide. You need to be disciplined. You need to be in good shape. You need to make sure that you look after yourself and the brothers around you. From 2007, I think the whole thing started to change. That's why now all of a sudden, you look at the Springboks team, we're always up there in the top 3 teams in the world, and I remember when Paul Drew came to me and said, listen, Stick, I want you to be the captain for the team. I couldn't believe. After that first season, there was a bit of already positive results. I think we finished second in the series, and then we went to 2008-2009 season, and then we finished, we won the series for the first time, which was something that's gonna stay forever in my life. That was something massive to me. One thing that helped me in my career and the transition from being a player to the coach is because of being a captain in a lot of teams that I played for. So you're always one of the brainstormers in the team, because of the decisions that needs to be made in the team back in the days. If you look at the sevens, I was one of the senior guys, So when it comes to decision being made with the coach at that time, I was always the guy that was always there to help the coach and the team with those decisions. And then also captaining the Kings in those days, So you're one of the brainstormers in the team, So you're one of the decision makers. So that is something that always helped me in my career, and also with that transition, like I said earlier on, and the nature of my position that I used to play. You're playing fly-off, You're one of the decision makers on the field. So you're one of the guys that has, at all times, you need to make sure that you understand your surroundings, you understand the plan, you understand the ins and outs of the game. My last rugby game, it was in 2012, and then I got injured in that game, and then I look back, I'm like, geez, young, if I'm gonna run when I try to do what I do best, which is stepping, and I got injured with that, maybe days are numbered for me when it comes to the rugby field. And then a couple of months later on, and then Robbie comes in, I still had a player's contract at the Kings, so I was still training and doing my rehab and all that stuff, but Robbie came to me, I think Alan Solomons was also still there, so they came to me and said, listen, they see potential to me as a coach. And then I'm looking at this gentleman, listen, I'm still a 28-year-old, and this guy comes and tells me that he sees the potential, I said to them, okay, you know what, just give me a couple of days. I remember it took me about a week to make that decision. But I look back and then I'm like, listen, you've got someone who's a Springbok, you've got someone who's got a big name in coaching at that time, Robbie Kempson, and Alan Solomons, who's been around as a coach for years, to see a potential in me, and then as a coach. And then it was an easy call for me to make. Yeah, hey, 32-year-old, all of a sudden, I remember a couple of weeks before that call up, and then I got a call from that time who was a head coach, Alistair Kutse, who gave me a call, and then he asked me about my roles and my responsibilities around the team at the Kings, at that time. And then I told him, listen, this is what I do with the team, and then that was it. Didn't say a lot to me, so he just asked me about my responsibilities and what I do with the Kings and where do I assist and all that stuff. And then 2 weeks later, and then I see my name on the TV. I see my name on the TV. That's how it happened. I only had one meeting with Alistair, and then 2 weeks later, and then I see my name on TV. Then I was nervous. I still remember I was sitting in one of the rugby fields, I think it's All Greys there in Port Elizabeth. I was sitting there with my colleagues, and all of a sudden I see my name popping out on TV, and I got nervous. A lot of people around me were celebrating with me, but for me, I'll be honest with you, I didn't really celebrate that moment. I remember my first time sitting down with him when we had to negotiate for the contract at that time for the Kings. He said, listen, he doesn't doubt my potential at all. So my first thing that stays in my mind when it comes to between me, myself and Russ, is that you've got someone who believes in you, you know. So he started telling me about everything that I was doing with the EP Kings under 19 and the potential that he saw in me in those days. And then I look at this gentleman, listen, this is someone who has won Currie Cup trophies with the Cheetahs, you know. He's one of the big names that are upcoming when it comes to coaching in South Africa. And he comes and tells me all these good stories about myself. And then I thought, you know what, man, maybe I must just keep my head down, you know, and make sure that I work hard, you know. There are people around you that believe in you. So I think it's also time for me to make sure that I start believing in myself. When I looked at those players, you know, and I couldn't help but being happy for them, you know, because I understood what they went through also. And special moment for me was to see a young kid like from Zweden, like Siya Kolisi, you know, lifting that trophy up with our president, Cyril Ramaphosa, you know. And there was a lot of emotions that went through that process, that went through that moment for me, you know, because I understood very, very well the challenges that Siya went through. And I can tell you now, 95% of the kids out in the township, they've got the same storyline they can tell that is similar to Siya Kolisi, that is similar to Mzwandile Stick, that is similar to Makazole Mapimpi. But once again, like I said, life is all about opportunities. So I was so glad that a guy like Siya Kolisi managed to grab that opportunity, you know. Even though you're gonna have challenges in life, you should never doubt yourself as a human being, you know. You should never doubt yourself as a coach.
All right, when we return, we'll speak a little bit more about that interview. My colleague Xola Ntshinga will be joining me to discuss Mzwandile Stick's interview, but also his life and also all about rugby. We'll be having that conversation with Xola Ntshinga right after this. Stay tuned.
Thanks.
So I'm on camera too, no?
Yeah, you're on camera too.
Okay.
Yes, you're on camera too.
And then Xola is on me.
Yes, I have not got camera.
Welcome back. Well, Xola Ntshinga is here to speak a bit about the significance of Mzwandile Stick's involvement in the Bok team, along with the effect COVID-19 has had on the rugby season. Xola, thank you so much for joining us and for your time. That interview was very candid, emotional. I mean, Mzwandile is very humble. Obviously coming from humble beginnings. I was smiling throughout because I'm also from the Eastern Cape. Port Elizabeth, to be specific. And I know that I said we were going to talk about Port Elizabeth a little bit later on in this interview, but perhaps let's start there. I mean, Port Elizabeth, New Brighton to be exact, has produced some excellent rugby players, Siya Kolisi being one of them. Let's talk about the significance of that area.
Yeah, well, Unathi, it's a pleasure to be here with you. And yeah, Mzwandile Stick is just yet another name. There is so much history, and I don't want to dwell too much on New Brighton. I think you have very close links to what is essentially, I think, the heart of black rugby in South Africa. At least it is at the moment, and has been historically. And it's not just Mzwandile Stick who hails from PE. I mean, if you look at the current Springboks setup, Rassie Erasmus is born in Dispatch. Another one from Dispatch, I think, was Dani Gerber, who would have played way before in the sort of Nasbota type era. But when you look at the players of color currently on, Siya Kolisi, of course, we know, is somebody who is highly voted in that part of the world. But he was preceded by another man who played in exactly the same jersey number many years ago. Well, not so many, I'm maybe giving away age here. Soliki Biliga, who played in that number 6 jersey for the Springboks, also from New Brighton, played for Spring Rose, which is one of the oldest clubs. And, you know, just to give people a good idea of how big rugby is around Port Elizabeth and the greater Nelson Mandela metropolitan area. It was probably about 2007 when I was sent on a bit of an assignment to go and do interviews around rugby clubs in the area. And it was a matter of trying to find which clubs to go to and speak to officials and give me the names and which clubs I should. Only to find out that in 2007 there were 125 clubs, rugby clubs around the greater Nelson Mandela metropolitan area. Look, some of those don't exist anymore. Some are clubs in name alone and don't necessarily have all that many players associated with them. But the fact that 125 times clubs have been set up because of the need and the want for people to play rugby means that that game does have a very strong link with that part of South Africa. So it is wonderful to see the Siya Kolisis of the world and the Rassis of this world come through and achieve at the highest level, and wonderful to see somebody who was lesser known like Mzwandile Stick able to rise to the top of the rugby world. It's really fantastic.
Now, a common thread amongst these players obviously is those humble beginnings. I mean, Mzwandile was telling us about the fact that he comes from a family of 14 members in one home, raised by a single mother who supported him during his primary school days. I mean, that's important for, you know, for children to be in, you know, that life and hone their skill. Talk to us about what happened, you know, from those early days to him ending up being a Sevens player and a Sevens captain.
Yeah, it's so important. I know, and I've been following rugby so closely for the past 15 odd years, and there's always been talk about the lack of transformation. Why is it that we don't see these players rise up beyond school age, and what is it that stops them? And I think a very large part of that is to do with the support structure or lack thereof when it comes to particularly family. And it's not a matter of always money and always nutrition or the technicalities. Sometimes it's just somebody to say, go and play. Do this, it's going to be good for you. We support you. We might not be able to go to matches and watch you every Saturday, but we want you to do this. And that's what Mzwandile had. And I think he speaks so well about his mother and how crucial she was in allowing him to be a rugby player, which is not something that is seen as a career option for many people. And also talking about the fact that he signed his first contract and was paid just over 1,000 rand a month for it, and how excited he was by that prospect, and everybody else was thinking, what are you talking about? So I think that support structure was really crucial for him as he grew up as a young player, signed that first contract in his early 20s, and went off to Durban, and he played very well with the Sharks. He played as a wing and a fullback, and I think in the South African rugby context and landscape, it's very clear that we value big, bulky, strong, ball-carrying rugby players, which he's not. He's fleet-footed, very skillful with ball in hand, and when he did eventually switch to Sevens, it suited him to a T. His physique, his speed, and then his ability to kick the ball as well came in incredibly handy. And then also Mzwandile has this humility that you talk about, and that I think stood him in good stead, and it was almost a no-brainer to have somebody like him become Springbok captain for as many years as he was. And in that time, the Boks were still struggling a little bit in terms of results, and Paul True was their coach, but he was able to mold a team which were the predecessors of the team that we've got now, who have really risen to the heights of Sevens rugby. So the likes of Mzwandile Stick and his co-players, guys like Mpho Mbiyozo, they became real, I suppose, important. Theo Aplon was another one who found his feet in Sevens and rose to superstardom after that. So these guys really showed the 15s world that you can take these Sevens players and their talents and apply them in 15s as well. He didn't necessarily do that after he played sevens. He applied it from a coaching point of view.
Now, before I go into his time now with the Springboks, him being an assistant coach, you touched on two things: development and physique. So let's talk about development. I mean, the Eastern Cape has been producing all of these rugby greats, yet there is a lack of development in that province. I mean, we were speaking earlier on about just the fact that they don't even have financial support at development stage.
It's been a really difficult year, particularly this one, and the Eastern Cape has lost its professional franchise, so the EP Kings are no longer. The amateur side, or at least the union, still remains, so the EP Mighty Elephants will still continue to live on, and the junior team, so we'll still see them at Craven Week as under 18 boys and girls going on to play. So at least that is still happening. But the key, I think, consideration for a lot of people when it comes to development in the Eastern Cape is that, and it's always been spoken about, very clearly known, that in order to be able to be successful at any contact sport, nutrition is key. And these are the nitty-gritties. These are the things that unfortunately are not the purview of rugby administrators, or more the purview of government. But in order to help the rugby out, there has to be, I think, there has to be the holding of hands from either arena. So it's very difficult. And I remember going to one of the schools, Grey PE, and they hosted a number of schools. Every Easter they have an Easter Schools festival, and they had a wonderful school from Itembelihle, and these boys were so determined, played some amazing rugby, super talented. But then I look at them from a rugby point of view, and I think they're too small, they're too light. They definitely need that physical help. And Mzwandile speaks about the coaches who came up to him and said, what is it you need? What can we do for you? How can we best change your approach to your regimen, your training, your eating, to help you become the best possible version of a rugby player that you can be? Now, this is not something that a lot of kids are able to have access to.
So, which leads me to that point, that next point of physique, of that physical capability of being a rugby player. Mzwandile, as you said, was smaller. He wasn't, the fit, typical rugby player. However, he excelled.
Yep.
And I mean, I recently watched a rugby documentary, and the whole game is basically based on the physical, and that's their tactic, that's their modus operandi. So is rugby going to shift at all beyond just the physical? I mean, what about ball skills? What about other things that the Mzwandiles possess, for instance, and that took them all the way up to sevens?
We've been so lucky in South Africa. It's been unlucky for the guys who've held those positions in particular, but we've been very lucky in that we've had some supremely talented rugby players who don't have the natural physical attributes that we tend to see.
Yeah.
I remember a couple of years ago seeing a study that was done by World Rugby showing the average size and height and weight of rugby players globally over a set period. And in 1995, when we hosted the World Cup, the average forward player, generally are bigger, is the same size as the average backline player today. So rugby players over the years have grown in stature, literally. But what we've had, and I touched on it, is we've been lucky because we've had so many super talented players who don't necessarily fit that mold. I started at 95, and maybe I should stick there, because Chester Williams became a household name.
Absolutely.
One of the smallest players, if not the smallest player in the Springbok team at the time, certainly one of the smallest on the field at the World Cup. A couple of years later, I've touched on Gio Aplon, absolutely supremely talented. Brayton Paulser was another name who used to enthrall crowds, and he used to finish it off with a bit of a flick-flack after he scored a try. And then, of course, the latest, greatest current name that I can think of now, Cheslin Colby, who has taken the rugby world by storm. He is arguably, over the last 12 to 18 months, the best wing in the world. You could argue it's always a matter of form. So we have, despite the fact that we've relied so heavily on this bulk and the traditional Springbok game, which is very strength dominated, have still been able to produced some incredible players. There are others who've fallen by the wayside, and now that I'm sitting talking to you, the names jump out at me. Somebody like a Brent Russell, who was known as the pocket rocket, small guy, diminutive, could sidestep somebody inside a telephone booth. That's the kind of talent we're talking about. So the Mzwandile Sticks of the world certainly do have a future in South African rugby. And I think somebody like Rassie Erasmus, who is very willing to apply those skills and that skill set into this team, so it's a wonderful mixture, was able to see that value. And I think that's why we've got as successful a team as we do. Especially
now, he's assistant coach to Rassie at the moment. But I mean, when Mzwandile retired, he then went back to the Eastern Cape. We saw his talent soar on the other side of rugby, and that's in the coaching. And that's what got him this job. Tell us about his role now with the Boks.
He is an assistant coach with the Springboks, and he cut his teeth in the Eastern Cape. He coached an under-19 team that won the national championship, and I think everybody sort of sat up and took notice and thought, okay, well, he's got something when it comes to the coaching. And I think after that, Rassie sort of pulled him closer into that Springbok fold. And now, as a backline player, a lot of people would assume that he teaches the attack play and so on. And he started off as pretty much a specialist. And his only role, as he started with the Springboks, was to deal with what they call exit kicks. So the opposition kicks the ball to you, and what happens when you receive the ball. That was his role. Very small role, but incredibly technical, and has so much to do with the ebb and flow and of the game itself. So he is not just learning even more about the game, he's applying the smallest, most minute detail and finishing touches, which can only stand him in good stead. I don't want to try and predict the future, but I think if he keeps going as he does, I wouldn't be surprised to see Mzwandile Stick as a Springbok coach in the future.
Wow. And then COVID hit. How badly did this pandemic affect rugby?
Incredibly badly. And I think the one thing that rugby doesn't necessarily have to worry about, which is a bit of an anomaly, and I hate saying it, is it's not been driven, at least in the last decade or so, by takings at the gate. We just don't see that mass of fans going to watch local provincial games. Test matches, different story, but local matches, not so big. So on that side, not affected too much. The big thing is it completely relies on sponsors, like most other sporting codes. I mean, I don't even want to think about the lesser, in inverted commas, sporting codes and how they're dealing with sponsors saying, we just don't know. We don't know when we're next going to see a rugby match on television or see it in public. How do we sponsor? So it's a matter of those partners trying to foster those long-term relationships. It's really tough at the moment. SA Rugby can't give any guarantees. They couldn't bail out the Eastern Cape as a result of it happening this year in this COVID hit time. So it's a matter of them really making sure that they appeal to their sponsors and they give value to their sponsors and they maintain those long-term relationships.
All right, before I let you go, just finally, like what's happening currently within the sporting fraternity, and I'm talking specifically rugby here. What are the next steps? I mean, we are still in a pandemic. We are now in the currently in the second wave.
So many things were supposed to have happened which didn't happen, and I think this is the worry, is a logistical one. British and Irish Lions series is coming and it's happening next year, would have been this year, so it's been postponed and pushed to next year. The big driver is that it's 20,000 visiting fans and they make it a financially viable tour to run, operate and host. So hopefully they'll be able to travel in big numbers. Otherwise, it will have an impact. Locally, we've seen the teams not play Super Rugby internationally, but play a domestic Super Rugby competition called Super Rugby Unlocked. That's come to an end, and now we've switched over to Currie Cup, and that's really fascinating for me because Currie Cup was done away with for the last couple of years, but now it's back, and it's back with a bang because we need to heavily rely on our domestic products, our domestic competitions as well. So the upshot, and I think the flip side of what's been a very dirty coin, is that now we're focusing inwardsly a little bit more, and hopefully what that will do is just foster a little bit more support and understanding, people wanting to see their stars, their heroes, local South African talent on the field, and again go out and support them in big numbers. That's the hope, at least. But challenging year, and who knows what the future holds. There's still a lot of uncertainty. The Boks would have been playing international tournament now, the Rugby Championship. They opted out. I do not blame them at all. that team is underprepared. They haven't played any real test rugby since the World Cup, and I don't think it would have boded very well for us. And also we have to really consider the health and safety of these players.
Absolutely.
We can't expose them to more of a threat than they already are. And we've seen so many matches being cancelled or postponed as a result of COVID. Let's not make it an international issue. So it's going to be tough. It's going to be very difficult. There will definitely still be uncertainty, but from a local South African point of view, we're looking forward to that British and Irish Lions tour. And next year, the Springboks Sevens also go to Japan for the Olympics, and hopefully they can bring us back some gold.
Well, an absolute pleasure speaking to you. I've learned so much about Mzwandile and all things rugby. Thank you so much for your